Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bruce Hamilton. I'm the chairman of the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board. I will preside over today's public meeting. I now call this meeting to order. I would like to introduce my colleagues on the board. To my left is Board Member Jesse Roberson. To my right, Board Member Joyce Connery. We three constitute the board. The board's acting general counsel, Mr. Joseph Gilman, is seated to my far right. The purpose of this meeting is to provide an opportunity for the National Nuclear Security Administration to brief the board on the status of the department's implementation plan for Board Recommendation 2019-01 regarding uncontrolled hazards and 10 CFR 830 implementation at the Pantex Plant, to discuss board concerns with the implementation plan and to discuss additional actions taken to improve the Pantex plant safety basis. On October 28th of 2019, this meeting was publicly announced on the board's website. Notice of this meeting was published in the Federal Register that same day. This concludes my opening remarks. I will now turn to my fellow board members for their opening remarks. Ms. Roberson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board Member Connery. Thank you, Mr. McConnell and Ms. Robbins, for your willingness to seek the opportunity to directly brief and discuss with us your plans in response to the board's recommendation on needed actions to address safety at the Pantex plant. I thank you for your openness and seriousness with which you approach the board's recommendation, as evidenced by your acceptance and actions taken to date. Actually, since the early 2000s, the NNSA has required its contractor or contractors to undertake a number of action plans intended to address some of the issues raised in the board's recommendation in the board's correspondence dating back to 2010 and resulting in the subject recommendation last year. But as those action plans have fallen short, failed to be executed, or demonstrated that the prescribed actions did not actually remedy the intended concerns, the adequacy of safety controls for nuclear explosive operations at the Pantex plant, and the processes that ensure those operations are safe, that those operations have a robust safety basis, have suffered. I want to thank both of you and your staffs for your engagement and support of the board's work to complete its focus reviews over the last 2 years, which underpin the recommendation. That kind of cooperation well serves both our agencies' legislative mandates, supporting safe operations in the defense nuclear facilities where you execute your national security missions. I also want to acknowledge that you yourselves reached similar conclusions about the shortcomings of a number of the Pantex safety bases, independent of the board's work, and we evaluated information from your own assessments and work products along with our own work to reach the conclusions presented in the recommendation. I look forward to your briefing today and hope we can find closure to the gaps in the implementation plan so that we can all have confidence in what responsive actions will be undertaken at the Pantex plant in support of its important mission. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my opening comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roberson. Board Member Connery.
Thank you. I'd like to also associate myself with Ms. Roberson's remarks, particularly about the openness with which our staff was received and was able to obtain information in their work leading up to this recommendation. I want to thank Mr. McConnell and Ms. Robbins for taking the time to brief us today on the implementation plan for Recommendation 2019-1. As you are aware, and I emphasize this for members of the public who may be tuning in, the board issues recommendations to the Secretary of Energy on matters it considers to have potential to compromise public health and safety. Pantex, a critical part of the nuclear weapons complex, was specifically added to the board's oversight mission through an amendment to our statute in the National Defense Authorization Act of 1992 and 93. The mission of Pantex is integral to the nation's nuclear deterrent, and as such, risk mitigation to prevent accidents at the facility are not only matters of health and safety, but also matters to preserve our deterrent. I'm grateful, therefore, that the department has accepted the recommendation, and I'm assuaged in knowing that Ms. Robbins, who has significant command of the site, its processes, its risks and challenges, is here to speak on the efforts, not only to answer the questions we posed in our recommendation and in subsequent correspondence, but also to provide insight into actions being taken at Pantex to ensure that the operations at Pantex have a robust safety basis. As we noted in our response to the department's implementation plan, we saw the plan as falling short of addressing the intent of our recommendation, and we hope that we can resolve these shortfalls through dialogue and potentially revise the plan to meet the intent of the recommendation. We are holding this meeting in public because it's the discussion of an active recommendation, and therefore we felt compelled to hold this discussion in the sunshine as dictated by our statute, and because it's a matter of public interest. Mr. McConnell, you participated in a similar discussion about a month or so with regards to the board's recommendation on the Savannah Rivers Tritium facility. In that instance, the Secretary decided to reject the board's recommendation while also providing information as to how the department would address those very same issues we raised, a matter that remains perplexing to me. While I look to Ms. Robbins to address our detailed concerns with regard to the implementation plan, what I hope to understand from you is the department's seeming inconsistency in the responses to the board recommendations, as well as an understanding of the agency's, of the department's oversight in general from headquarters. Also of concern to me, and I believe to the board as a whole, is the seeming discontinuation of the practice of board staff interaction with the site offices during the drafting of an implementation plan. This was a long-held practice outlined in detail in the interface manual between the department and the board that was then superseded by the now infamous Order 140.1, which seems to devalue such collaboration. Our mission is to provide advice to the Secretary of Energy in his role as operator and regulator of defense nuclear facilities and in providing adequate protection of public health and safety at such facilities. Our mission is not, I submit, in contrast to yours, but in support of yours to carry out the work of the nation by guaranteeing its stockpile. So I look forward to the dialogue. Thank you. That concludes my opening remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Connery. For the structure of this meeting, we'll start with the NNSA briefing, during which we may ask some clarifying questions. And following the briefing, we will review the recommendation and implementation plan to make sure we haven't missed anything that NNSA wants to share with us, or to see if we have any lingering questions. With that, I will now turn things over to Mr. James McConnell, the Associate Administrator for Safety, Infrastructure, and Operations in the National Nuclear Security Administration. Mr. McConnell is also the central technical authority responsible for safety policy and interpretation throughout NNSA. Also representing NNSA is Ms. Teresa Robbins, the manager for the NNSA's production office. Mr. McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, for this opportunity to discuss the Department of Energy's implementation plan for Recommendation 2019-1. As I have said before, most recently at the last public meeting, DOE and NNSA welcome and value constructive feedback from the board to help us advance our mutual goal of ensuring the department's vital missions are executed safely. As I have also said before in the past, I am particularly grateful for the 12 years that I spent as a staff member on the DNFSB working on your side of this mutual partnership. And I guess at this session it's probably relevant to point out that I spent 2 of those years as DNFSB site representative at Pantex. As you indicated in your October 28th letter, I'd like to address some of the specifics of the issues concerning the implementation plan, and then subsequent to your questions, I'll turn over to my colleague for more detailed discussions. The recommendation states that the board finds that DOE and NNSA need to take action to ensure adequate protection from hazards associated with nuclear operations at Pantex are sustained. DOE shares the view that we should continue to improve the safety basis at Pantex, and we accepted the recommendation. DOE and NNSA have fulfilled all actions required under the Atomic Energy Act regarding DNFSB Recommendation 2019-1. So I'd like to reemphasize that we did accept the recommendation and go on that we believe that our implementation plan is a good faith effort to address the board's recommendation. Understanding that we have subsequently received from you information that we regard as valuable feedback on the quality of our implementation plan. We'll get into that in more detail in a little while. A couple of other items about the implementation plan. It clearly references actions that were completed prior or between the time that the board and its staff provided feedback to us on issues that were captured in the recommendation and the time that we finished the implementation plan. So some of the actions in the implementation plan came across as complete on the day that the implementation plan was approved. The other thing that's quite obvious is that we did not structure the implementation plan to provide a point-to-point correlation to the items identified in the 38 pages of backup material that the board provided with its recommendation. Another key point, some elements of our implementation plan describe ongoing actions to evaluate issues at Pantex and then develop more specific responses. While we would all like to be at the point of implementing change, many of these issues are complicated and nuanced. Indeed, as the board has pointed out, several previous improvement efforts have not been fully successful. This implementation plan highlights several areas where NNSA and its M&O partners are devoting significant time and effort to understand issues deeply, to challenge norms, uncover root causes, and ultimately develop sustainable solutions. This will take time, but we strongly believe it is the best course of action. The board's October 28th letter provided feedback on specific technical issues, and we thank the board for its useful critique of our IP. Some points in particular that we will be addressing to improve our response include DOE guidance or industry standards for special tooling, design, manufacturing, and maintenance, evidence to justify and explain completed actions, and a technical basis for special tooling requirements. Other parts of the board's feedback relate to what could be called issues of execution style or preference, such as whether the federal government should approve the actions in the implementation plan as opposed to actions being assigned the responsibility of our M&O partner, or the extent of the use of detailed written procedures. While we appreciate the board's perspective, we are responsible for managing and directing the operations of the nuclear security enterprise, and our approach is consistent with what the administrator has articulated in the NNSA management and government framework. One particular item of ongoing disagreement concerns whether or not the actions DOE and NNSA have taken to date and have committed to take in the IP adequately address the class of hazards and accidents termed falling technician. DOE and NNSA and its M&O partners, both at Pantex and at our design laboratories, have been working on this issue with the board for several years. While it has been a difficult issue, we believe that our planned and completed actions adequately define and control this hazard. CNS, our M&O partner at Pantex, has developed a white paper in coordination with Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore, and Sandia on why the universal falling technician model is sufficient. This white paper is currently in review and will be finalized in 2020. We believe this will close the issue. NNSA and our M&O partners, subject matter experts, conclude that the actions to date and the white paper adequately address the definition and control of the hazard, the falling man or falling technician accident scenario. But I would like to end my portion of this initial discussion on a positive note. We believe that overall this interaction about Recommendation 2019-1 is an excellent example of how DOE and the board should interface and how the function should operate. The department developed its conclusions and actions and plans and then approved and published our implementation plan in an accountable and an open way. The board independently evaluated our final product and provided us feedback. Based on that feedback, recent events, and other information, the Department of Energy has accepted the need to revise and update our implementation plan. I don't believe this is the first time you're hearing this, but it is our intention to provide a revised implementation plan to address issues. When that document is completed, we will provide it to you, and we look forward to continuing dialogue to continue to increase the quality of our responses. Subject to your questions, which I suspect you probably have, I'll then turn it over to Ms. Robbins for.
Thank you, Mr. McConnell. Let's take a little break here and let the board members ask
Please.
questions to you, and then we'll go to Ms. Robbins, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll.
I have one question.
Okay, Ms. Robertson.
Let's go back to that falling man model. which you and I sat across the table for a long time, like since 2010. And I think there's been a significant investment. Sometimes I think the board has said you guys are overthinking it, overdoing it. However, I want to make sure I understand what you just told us. Obviously, we don't know what's in the model that in the paper that you're waiting for, but we're assuming it's going to say permanently you are relying on the admin controls that you have previously relied on. Permanently.
Our control strategy includes reliance on those administrative controls. I wouldn't say it is solely reliance on those administrative controls. So
as you look at your special tooling, this is not a factor you'd consider as to whether there are engineering options.
So in more detail, Ms. Robbins will get into more detail, but one of the considerations when it comes to live loading on our tools, for example, is the loading that would result from a falling technician scenario.
Okay, so you're going to talk more about it. I'll wait. Okay, thank you.
So I just want to go back to the last thing you said, where you articulated that this is how you believe that the interaction with the board and the department should look. So, I'm not that I don't love having public meetings, they're great, but like I said in the past and explicitly written in the manual that was developed between the board and the department, it's been long our practice so that we wouldn't get into a situation in which you developed an implementation plan that may miss the mark of what we meant in our recommendation through misunderstanding or what have you. There's specific requirements that at least twice drafts would be shared with our staff so that we'd have an understanding of where you were going, and if we needed to make suggestions to adjust fire, so to speak, we would be able to do that. Similarly to the fact that it's in our statute, was put in our statute with regard to the recommendations, that the department would have opportunity to look at draft recommendations and correct any misguidance that we may have about what's going on at the site. So I just want to understand, your position is that this is the way it should work, with no interaction with the staff as the IP is being developed? I mean, then let me say, I'm thrilled that you guys are willing to work with us on a revision to the IP, but it sounds to me like, from your perspective, time is money. For our perspective, time is, safety delayed or deferred. So I want to understand why that's in your mind, a more suitable way of doing business is wait till we're done doing our homework, we'll turn it in, and we're not going to entertain any interim steps.
I appreciate the question, and I understand the perspective. I worked on numerous recommendations while I was a staff member here. But there are other factors also that to take into account. And one of the things that the Department of Energy and NNSA have been grappling with for a while now is the implication of, well, it's actually one of the items of integrated safety management. It's a principle, line management responsibility for safety. That has two sides of things. One is that line has to step up and understand that it owns safety, and at the end of the day, it is responsible for safety. It can't be a collateral duty assigned to some other entity. And in order to really own the responsibility, one has to be willing to step up and be held accountable for the individual or collective decisions. It is, and I'll probably get in trouble for being more blunt than I perhaps should be, but it is a trap that the department has fallen into more than a couple of times, where our decision making and our responsibility, it has become, we have relinquished that, and all we have done is given back to you or others what you said to us. In the worst scenario, it's simply a way to make the other party go away by just accepting what they say, and right? That's the worst possible outcome. And so over the last while, several years, the department, as it's been looking at its culture for lots of valid reasons, has concluded that we need to make sure that we have a considered effort to ensure we reestablish, to the extent it is appropriate and necessary all across the department, that we need to have and use the technical capability to reach well-considered, well-defended positions, and then hold those positions in a way that we're willing to be held accountable. These two things that we're just talking about are both valid. What our consideration right now is how do we end up having a situation where we can actually grow and depend on and be responsible for line management safety, but still take the best use of your collective feedback, and there are other bodies like you that provide us collective feedback. We think this is the appropriate model where we have good interchanges, we have open and objective, willingness to hear different opinions and to improve our technical responses for the good of the mission and the public. But there have to be certain steps to make sure that we can have that and have accountability at the same time. It's a position that's somewhat at odds with what you've just stated, but it is the conclusion that the department has reached.
Well, and I appreciate the difficulty you have with perhaps managing your line management to make sure that they are stepping up to the plate and having their responsibilities. I would say that from a safety culture standpoint, taking into account the input of the safety agency seems to be something that you would want to do. And I understand what you're saying. We take it to a point, and then we go off and have our own consideration. But closing yourself off from that input could create the opposite scenario in which the line management rejects all other independent voices and has a bias for their own insight without taking anybody else into consideration. So I would just say, as a safety professional, I would be concerned about cutting your line management off of feedback from an outside technical staff. Obviously, they have to exercise their own judgment, and they have many more things to take into consideration. We're lucky. All we have to do is look at safety. You guys have to look at a bunch of other things and weigh those things. So from my standpoint, I'm still not convinced that this is the best way to do business. And I would have hoped that when the department took a decision to cut us out of something that we had been a part of for a very, very long time, like an implementation plan, that conversation would have happened with the board before it was implemented. But we are where we are at this point with Pantex, and I don't want to get into the philosophical debate now. I'd rather kind of delve into the issues with Pantex's safety basis.
And I appreciate that. I at least what I think we're discussing is there's a collect information openly and without sometimes there's human resistance to information that is different than what you currently have or believe. We have to be open to that. Then we have to go into a mode where we make decisions, and then we have to be able to communicate our decisions clearly and openly and accept the next round of feedback. We all agree that that's the right process. What we're describing here is where in this iterative process do we draw the lines, and we will continue to need to work on that.
One more comment, because it's kind of, and I invite you to push back on me in case I misunderstood, on the issue of the board pushing back because it wants to make sure that any commitment to the board is that of NNSA, not uniquely as contractor, which is kind of the opposite of what you two were saying. I think in that vein, we're actually trying to make sure we are respectful of our legislative relationship and that our relationship does not run through the contractor. So however NNSA commits or not to the board, we are looking for NNSA's commitment, not your contractors. I just wanted to make sure of that.
And I appreciate that. That makes sense. You probably read or heard or had a copy of our governance and management framework. We consider the national security enterprise to be a 44,000 person thing, which is the sum of the federal contributors to our mission and our M&O partner contributors. The implementation plan signed by a Fed, which represents the federal commitment from our undersecretary to our secretary and also implicitly to you, is a federal commitment. The steps and the method by which we team as one enterprise to achieve our objectives is one where we consider our M&O partners peers in our mission. And so I can understand why you could come to that conclusion, but from our perspective, you have a government commitment, but in our approach to things and the way that we will execute in our commitments to our secretary, it's a collaboration.
So can I just clarify then, because earlier you said we want to make sure that our line management understands the commitments it's making and makes those decisions. So I'm trying to reconcile that with we can make a deliverable, a contractor deliverable, and all the federal manager has to look at is the entirety. They don't have to understand necessarily or have blessed necessarily the specific path or taken those safety considerations of any of the deliverables into effect. It seems a little contradictory.
I guess the way I would describe it is that in this partnership, in this 44,000 person national security enterprise, our trust and our relationship with our M&O partners is that we are willing to be held accountable to the products that they produce, even if it's not something we explicitly approve through some SER or something. That the government has the opportunity to look at a document, even that wasn't submitted to us for approval, and find it lacking and direct our M&O partners to redo it or do something different. So we are willing to be accountable even to those actions where from a management and governance perspective, we don't necessarily see the need to put another layer of review and approval on. Hopefully that clarifies you a little bit where we are. Whatever.
Let me just say I'm a little concerned with the word commitment. My understanding of the relationship between the board and the Department of Energy and NNSA may differ from my colleagues. Once you've accepted the implementation plan, it is your commitment to yourself, not to me. So I'm speaking only for myself. I'm not speaking for my fellow board members, but you don't owe me anything. That's your commitment, and I think that aligns with everything I've talked with the administrator about in wanting to make sure you understand who's accountable and responsible. And you're not accountable and responsible to me. You're accountable and responsible to your organization. So this is not time to debate nuances and words. I just wanted to make it clear that when we talk about commitments, we need to be careful.
If I misspoke, I agree with what you said, sir.
I don't think we need to dig any further in this. Let's go on.
Our implementation plan is written
I just wanted
to
to
our
offer
secretary.
a differing view.
Yes.
So without objection, we'll go on to Ms. Robbins' comments.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow board members. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today to discuss actions that NNSA is taking to improve the safety posture of the Pantex plant. I would like to take this opportunity to recognize Mr. Jason Armstrong. He is our NNSA Production Office Assistant Manager for Nuclear Safety and Engineering. He has over 28 years of experience in nuclear safety, both commercial and within the government. The Pantex plant in Amarillo, Texas is the primary site in our nation and the only site in our nation for assembly and disassembly of nuclear weapons. Pantex operations include support of nuclear weapon life extension programs, dismantlement campaigns, and component testing and reliability programs. In 2001, DOE issued 10 CFR Part 830, Nuclear Safety Management, which required DOE sites to develop documented safety analyses. During the following decade, Pantex personnel developed hazard analysis reports and safety analysis reports that analyzed the many hazards associated with nuclear operations at Pantex and identified hazard controls that ensure that Pantex workers and the citizens of West Texas are adequately protected. Improvements realized during implementation of these new safety basis documents included reducing hazards such as hand lifts of explosive components and electrical insult hazards, in addition to countless others. Notwithstanding the substantial improvements NNSA has made to safety of operations at the Pantex plants during the past 2 decades, NNSA agrees with the Board that additional actions can and should be taken to further reduce the risk inherent to nuclear explosive operations. In February of this year, the Board issued Recommendation 2019-1 titled Uncontrolled Hazard Scenarios and 10 CFR 830 Implementation at the Pantex Plant. Several of the primary concerns the Board identified in the Recommendation 2019-1 were already being addressed, as you have noted, through execution of a corrective action plan that NNSA directed the Pantex Plant contractor Consolidated Nuclear Security, LLC, to develop in response to similar issues that were identified by NNSA in 2017 and 2018. Notwithstanding the ongoing corrective actions and recognizing the value of the Board's suggestions, NNSA accepted Recommendation 2019-1 and in June 2019 provided the Board with an implementation plan that addresses each of the key issues identified in the recommendation. Consistent with the Congress's direction codified in the Atomic Energy Act, the subject implementation plan was structured to be completed within a year, recognizing that actions to comprehensively improve and revise the more than 25,000-page Pantex safety basis will take several years to complete. To date, 16 of the 35 actions identified in the implementation plan have been completed by CNS and are under review by the NNSA Production Office. I would like to take this opportunity to highlight several of the key improvements that have been achieved during the past year. First, your recommendation states there are high-consequence hazards that are not adequately controlled or may have controls but lack documentation linking the controls to the hazards. The recommendation suggested that DOE and NNSA perform an extent of condition evaluation of the Pantex safety basis and implement subsequent corrective actions to ensure compliance with DOE regulations and directives. NNSA also recognized this and initiated a 16-month resource-intensive effort to execute a series of comprehensive extent of condition reviews. The objectives of these reviews is to identify all instances of high-order consequences for which controls were either not identified or lacked proper documentation. These extent of condition reviews, I'm happy to report, are to be completed this month and have resulted in additional actions being taken to address specific high-hazard scenarios that ensure compliance with DOE requirements. MPO has reviewed each of these extent of condition products as they have been completed by CNS. Second, your recommendation states that the NNSA Production Office and the Pantex contractor have been unable to resolve known safety basis deficiencies, specifically the treatment of falling technician scenarios. The recommendation suggested that NNSA implement actions to ensure controls protect a unit from falling technician scenarios, and that the controls should be designated as specific administrative controls. As my colleague Mr. McConnell has stated, NNSA has concluded this issue is going to be worked through the white paper. In addition, we have implemented controls in all operational nuclear explosive facilities to prevent technicians from tripping and falling into vulnerable nuclear explosive configurations by removing tripping hazards and ensuring technicians approach these configurations from specifically defined safe directions. Consistent with your recommendation, Pantex formally designated and implemented these protocols as specific administrative controls. I'm happy to pause here if we'd like to talk more about your question, ma'am, Ms. Roberson, specifically with respect to special tooling and whether or not we are going to do more with a dynamic environment. We have done one test, I believe you're aware of that, with a specific tool, and the test did confirm that our analysis and the amount of deflection assumed in our analysis and documented in our calculation was still bounding. We have committed to do more of those. We do not feel, however, that it is appropriate to dynamically test every special tool. But we have committed, and it is part of our implementation plan, to do more dynamic testing on our special tools.
I appreciate that. I think the board appreciates that too. I think the only other question is, as you implement actions, really looking forward to ensuring the standards and requirements for safety controls, i.e. special tooling, that this is something you also consider as to whether there are engineered options so that you don't have to, because listen, I walk to the metro every day and I never intend to trip, but I often do. So I'm just saying the best of intentions, and I think we agree it is a fine interim control, but it's not clear that it's the best when it comes to controls, whether an engineered control, if possible, would make more sense.
Ma'am, we always prefer engineered over administrative controls where they are available. To date, we have not been able to identify an appropriate engineered control. We do believe that these specific administrative controls do prevent the tripping technician from having an impact on the unit. And that was the purpose of the specific administrative controls. We're not ruling out engineered controls. We just don't have any that we have been able to identify or design to be effective. And one of the cautions that I have always, and it's balancing all of the safety and being able to get the work done at the same time, is if we make it too hard for our production technicians to do the job, we could be creating a less safe situation. And so we have to balance that when we're putting in place physical engineered controls.
And I appreciate that, and I understand, so I think I understand the challenge that you guys have with the variety and extent of the operations. I'm just looking to make sure that there isn't a closed mind to the potential for engineered controls if they self-identified.
Yes, if we were to identify an engineered control that we believe could be effectively implemented without impacting safety, we absolutely would adopt that.
Okay.
We are not precluding engineered controls, I guess is the better way to say that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Continuing on, third, your recommendation states that the processes for maintaining and verifying implementation of the safety bases at Pantex are deficient, including completion of annual updates as required by 10 CFR 830. NNSA recognized this deficiency as well and directed CNS to come into compliance with this requirement. CNS has achieved compliance with the annual update requirement by submitting updates of all 16 safety basis documents within the past year. NNSA is committed to continue to ensure that all Pantex safety basis documents are updated annually.
Hi.
Hi.
So, and we appreciate that. I guess we would note that those updates didn't necessarily resolve all what I call extenuating situations, like you may have JCOs or other things that still live outside. And our hope was that in those updates, and maybe it's not this evolution, those will start to get pulled in and evaluated as a part of the whole picture and eliminate some of those hanger-oners outside.
Yes, ma'am. That would be the ideal situation. We are not yet at that point. Our goal was to get us get everything updated, and we had, unfortunately, annual updates outstanding for years, and we felt that we needed to get that taken care of. And then as we continue to mature, we will be working to ensure our safety basis is maintained current. We do not want to keep justification for continued operations open for long periods of time, and I am going to talk about that as well. But that is our goal.
And if I might add, as Ms. Robbins said, with a 25,000-page safety basis that some people might be tempted to describe as Byzantine, it is difficult to maintain configuration management. It is difficult to resolve one issue without knowing you are inadvertently creating another. So we have a very large number of reasons to question whether what we're doing is consistent with what we intended to do, partly because of the complexity and the sheer volume and interaction of our safety basis. And so one of the things, and that's not necessarily in the best way to approach safety, because it's very hard for workers to ensure that they're doing what's right when there are so many things to try and keep in mind. So coming up with a more holistic, a more executable, a more comprehensive safety basis, some of which might, for example, passive engineered features, remove a lot of complexity, is a way to cut down on that carrying cost, if you can let me use that term, of how to continuously monitor our safety basis. And so that effort, which is well underway, but is a very substantial effort, will hopefully mean fewer reasons to have a justification for continued operation in the first place, and therefore they won't have to be folded into a future DSA.
Thank you.
Okay. Fourth, your recommendation states that some justifications for continued operations, also known as JCOs, last for several years without updating the relevant safety basis document, relying on compensatory measures without implementing rigorous controls. NNSA has ensured all JCOs, justification for continued operations, that had been in place for more than a year were incorporated into approved safety basis documents, and that controls have been rigorously implemented. Fifth, your recommendation states that NNSA has been unable to resolve several legacy conditions of approval, although the recommendation acknowledged that prior to the creation of NPO, there were 40 conditions of approval, and only, I believe the recommendation said 5, but I believe there are 6 currently remain open. NNSA has developed a schedule to address 5 of the conditions of approval by this upcoming March of 2020, which is 4 months from now. Well, 3.5, we'll go there. And the remaining condition of approval will be resolved in 2021 as it requires physical modification.
Yeah, we were given a discount on that one. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh.
So when you say resolve, does that actually eliminate the condition of approval or generate a plan or schedule to resolve?
So it's resolved. So an example of that is we needed to do a pool fire in a certain facility, an analysis of a pool fire. That analysis will be completed and incorporated into the safety basis document.
Okay.
The one I'm talking about with physical modification, in order to eliminate the hazard, we actually have to go in and remove something in order to resolve that. And that Mr. McConnell is supporting us through funding to do those kind of activities.
Well, I think that in and of itself will be a great achievement because these have been hanging out for a lot of years. So 2021, is that what I heard?
Yeah, 2021.
Yeah. Great.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
And that'll be the last one. That'll be the one remaining after March of 2020. March of 2020, we'll have the 5 resolved, and then in 2021, we'll have the completion of the physical modification.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Those accomplishments aside, 6 weeks ago, the board informed DOE of specific concerns you have regarding the implementation plan. I look forward to discussing those concerns in more detail during this public meeting, but it is worth sharing now that NNSA senior management is currently planning to revise the implementation plan, as my colleague Mr. McConnell has stated, based in part on the feedback you have provided. The scope of this revision is notionally focused on including additional improvement actions related to the Pantex Special Tooling Program and including actions related to DOE approval of key deliverables that will be developed during execution of the implementation plan. I want to be very clear. I do feel ownership of the implementation plan and will ensure that each of the actions is acceptable prior to closure. As the owner, I've directed my staff to ensure cross-disciplinary federal teams formally review the applicable evidence package prior to proposing closure of each action identified in the implementation plan. We have also developed a SharePoint site that is being used to track the status of each of these actions. Your resident inspectors at Pantex, Mr. Zach Bouvet and Ms. Miranda McCoy, have access to that database and all of the evidence packages associated with the files. In addition, I have recently reinstated monthly meetings with your resident inspectors at both of my sites to ensure clear and timely communication. I do value the exchange of information and concerns. I spent a full day recently at Pantex to better understand special tooling, and I came away with a clear understanding of the rigor that is in place with regard to design, procurement, testing, maintenance, and training and qualification of special tooling engineers. Improvements are ongoing as a result of NNSA oversight, specifically in applying NQA1 quality standards and strengthening maintenance work packages. However, I noted the need for additional improvements, specifically with respect to non-destructive evaluation of welds. We are strengthening the special tooling program, which is one of the reasons we're revising our implementation plan. Lastly, taking action to address the specific concerns identified in the board's recommendation is just one of several ongoing initiatives to improve the content, structure, configuration management, and implementation of the Pantex safety basis. Other improvements achieved during the past year as a result of executing these initiatives include the following. We're increasing both the total number of staff in the Pantex Safety Analysis Engineering Group and the number of qualified safety basis analysts and unreviewed safety question evaluators. We're reducing the backlog of outstanding unreviewed safety question determinations by more than 40%. We're improving administrative processes associated with the development of safety basis documents, which have demonstrably improved the quality of the contractor safety basis submittals. We are enhancing requirements associated with the development of documentation that serves as an input to safety basis documents, such as calculations and engineering evaluations. In addition, there are 3 key ongoing improvement initiatives that I would like to recognize during this meeting. First, NNSA is taking a suite of actions to improve the implementation of safety controls at Pantex. One key focus area for improving implementation of safety controls involves actions to enhance conduct of operations. A second key focus area for improving implementation of safety controls involves actions to ensure and enhance the rigor of the control owner program and practices for monitoring control implementation. Second, NNSA has kicked off an initiative to significantly revise and improve safety basis Pantex safety basis during the next 5 years. NNSA drove the Pantex contractor to develop a vision and execution strategy that outlined the scope, objectives, and schedule associated with this extremely ambitious effort. NNSA is confident that this effort will result in simplified analysis and controls, which will in turn facilitate long-term efficiencies in the maintenance and implementation of the safety basis documents and the safety controls identified therein. Third, NNSA has chartered a group of complex-wide subject matter experts to redesign the processes and interfaces between NNSA's design agencies, also known as our national laboratories, and our production plants, that enable the production plant contractor and weapons response communities to more efficiently and effectively develop, implement, and execute the Pantex safety basis. This redesign effort will likely result in revising DOE standards and take years to execute and implement, but we recognize the importance of this effort toward ensuring the long-term success of the Pantex nuclear safety mission. All of these actions I have discussed reflect that we have an effective control suite in place at Pantex today to ensure adequate protection of the public. We can always do better. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
I want to just comment, I really appreciate the fact that you're meeting with Mr. Beauvais and Ms. McCoy on a monthly basis, because our resident inspectors are the best of the best. And so I was very encouraged to hear that. Ms. Connery?
Not that you weren't when you were there, Mr. McConnell. Anyway.
I just consider myself.
So I actually want to address a couple of the things that you said, Ms. Robbins, because they were really wonderful to hear. I reiterate what the chairman said. It's fantastic that you're meeting with the resident inspectors on a monthly basis. They do great work and do some analyses that we don't even expect them to do and come back with some fantastic data. So I hope that you guys use that to the fullest extent in what you're doing. I'm also thrilled to hear that you're going to be beefing up the safety basis staff. I think given the voluminous size or Byzantine size of the safety basis, having more federal staff who have an understanding of it and can oversee what your contractor partners are doing, I think is extremely helpful. I'm also excited to hear that you're looking at conduct of operations, because I think, again, that's something that we see across the board in a number of places that always can use a little bit of scrutiny in order to maintain the excellence that you have at the plant. with regard to special tooling, and I'm glad you went down and walked through. So first of all, let me say, special tooling at Pantex is an amazing and unique skill set. The skill of the craft is incredible. I think that the challenges that we saw with it was simply how do you maintain the rigor across the board. So there's rigor that goes into it, but where is the where are the specs, the requirements put into place so that you're not just looking at expert judgment to ensure that these components, which are so crucial because of what they do in terms of the special tooling and protecting the warhead, are at a particular level. So I think that when we looked at the special tooling, that was one of the things, and those standards for the welds that struck us was how do you ensure that there is adequate rigor in their maintenance and in their inspection programs. So that's the first thing. The other thing I want to say with regards to that was because we know you're taking a number of actions outside of the IP, which is great, and we will stay abreast of those. I don't know if you're considering putting any of those in the IP. I understand that by statute it says you should be able to complete these things in a year. I don't think that I've ever seen a recommendation that's been completed in a year since I've been at the board. Jesse's saying no, so probably never. So to the extent that it's useful to put them in the IP for completeness or for better understanding, I think that that's a helpful thing to do. But in particular, one of the things that the staff has talked to us about is that you're making improvements on special tooling. And I just want to understand, because my understanding is the special tooling is kind of doing their own self-evaluation, and I don't know that the safety basis engineering group is involved in that. And so my question after all that preface is, are they involved? And if they're not involved, why wouldn't you have them involved?
So what I can speak to, I can't answer the question. I'll get you an answer as far as is safety basis engineering from CNS engaged in improving this special tooling program. I believe they are, but I want to be confident in that answer, so I would like to get you that answer for sure. I will say that one of the things that the MPO staff identified is that the work packages associated, the maintenance work packages associated with special tooling were not compliant with the nuclear maintenance management program required by order, DOE order, and so we have specified that they have to bring their maintenance work packages into compliance with that program, and the CNS is actively doing that right now. So we also recognize there needed to be more rigor in how the maintenance was performed and documented. We also noted that while the program has always followed NNSA policy 24 on weapons quality, it is a nuclear safety control. It needed to be procured and inspected and tested under NQA1, which is our nuclear quality standard. So we are making those changes, and that came about as a result of the excellent staff that I have in MPO identifying those issues and working those with CNS.
And that all will be documented in the deliverable for the IP, or is that outside? I'm just trying to connect the two.
Okay, yes, I apologize. I forgot to follow up on that. The revision to the IP, my expectation is that we are going to include, I've asked CNS to come up with their proposal for additional non-destructive evaluation of welds, and I expect that to be part of the revision to the IP. As far as the maintenance work package improvement, that will definitely be part of consideration in the IP. I see no reason why it shouldn't be part of the IP. And then the NQA1, we have a detailed implementation corrective action plan associated with that as well. That easily could be part of the implementation plan.
I'm not hearing any more questions. Did you have any other remarks? I'm not hearing, thank you. I'm not hearing any other questions. Did you have any other remarks that you wanted to offer? Or
That was the conclusion of my remarks,
okay.
sir.
We have on our projector, if we could put it up, kind of an outline of the implementation plan that we'd like to use as kind of a departure for asking questions. So first of all, I'll just give everyone a minute to refresh memory on what these sub-recommendations looked like. And there they are on the screen. What I'd like to do is walk through what we had developed, not to necessarily go through each one, but to give us a point of, for my fellow board members and me to ask questions or kind of probe a little bit. So federal ownership of IP, numerous IP deliverables are solely a contractor product without federal review. So any discussion?
The only discussion, I think we've talked about this one early on. I don't know if we resolved it, but I think we did. But the thing that I would ask is we step through these since you've seen them, you've had an opportunity to talk about them. Since we don't know what a revision specifically would look like, if there are elements of our recommendation or what we identified as gaps that you're pretty sure you're not going to address, please let us know.
Okay.
Yeah, so as I said, I guess I want to be clear that every document has federal review. Not every document has a defined product that is a piece of paper documenting the results of our review. So it may be a nuance, but as I said before, we review all of these documents to the point where we're willing to be accountable for them.
As I stated in my remarks, I have asked my team to put together, we do oversight on a routine basis, and we document that oversight through our assessment process, and we capture those products, our assessment products, in a computer system called ePegasus. And so my team is going to be documenting their oversight assessment of each of those implementation plan deliverables through an assessment that will be captured in our ePegasus system. And so if it doesn't require our approval, if it requires our approval, like it's a safety evaluation report or something of that nature, we will not do a separate assessment in ePegasus. But if it's just a deliverable of a plan or a revised strategy that doesn't require our approval, we will document our acceptance of that through an assessment.
And I think the last part of this question, I guess I would have then, as I understood you, Ms. Robbins, generally speaking, the board would have access to understand that through your ePegasus system that our resident inspectors have access to?
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
how we would know those are done?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Your resident inspectors, we did confirm, have access to ePegasus. And any assessment we put into ePegasus throughout the month gets rolled up into a monthly report that we transmit to the contractor. Your resident inspectors would be also on copy of that assessment report as it's transmitted back to CNS.
Just one follow-up, and you may or may not know the answer. So we have struggled a little bit in this 140 world where information is available at the site, but we're unable to evaluate that back here. Is there any such limitation?
I'm not aware of any limitation. Okay. I'm not aware of us denying any access to documentation that's been requested. We do have a process. There's a form. Your resident inspectors usually follow that, and we have our site liaisons that will work with your resident inspectors to ensure that we understand the document request and we get the documents to you in a timely manner.
Thank you.
And I'm sure everyone in the room understands this, but just because it's a public meeting, I wanted to make sure that, for the record, we all identify that there are security issues related to information at Pantex, and so all these processes are appropriately handled in those regards.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think specifically the issue is sometimes the resident inspectors have access to the information, but then they're not allowed to transmit it, obviously properly, to headquarters. So that's because some of the teams that they have to work with are headquarters teams. So that's the question. And I don't believe that there's a problem, but I think that's what you were alluding to. So we just wanted to raise that.
Okay, I too am not aware of a problem, but I encourage that if we do run into a situation of that nature, please don't hesitate to reach out or have your technical director reach out, and we will make sure we get that resolved promptly.
Oh, that'd be great. So I just have a quick question on, because you talked about the assessment plans that you have, effectiveness plans, I guess, for the implementation plan. You have one scheduled, I think, 6 months out after the implementation plan is done. Is there any more, are there any more planned effectiveness reviews either on the part of NPO or on the part of headquarters that you intend to conduct following the implementation plan?
So one of the practices that we employ is using the Department of Energy's Office of External Assessment, Enterprise Assessment, and we have employed them to look at where we are to date already. We've brought them in to look at the implementation plan and to look at our deliverables, the actions that CNS is submitting to make sure that we're getting what we need to in that. And my plan is to continue to use the Office of Enterprise Assessment to look at how effective we are. I would also like to take this opportunity to note that working with my colleague, Mr. McConnell, he has provided us additional resources to assist in providing effective oversight of the Pantex safety basis process. He has some senior experienced nuclear safety specialist staff that he has essentially dedicated to allow us to use their expertise in how we provide oversight of this Pantex safety basis process, and that too has been very beneficial.
One other item I might add, and both Teresa and I have mentioned it, is that we recognize that this implementation plan will be of higher quality when we add some more evidence of closure or achieving objectives. In some cases, the action itself provides the evidence of closure, but there will probably be cases where that is not the case, and then we will have to figure out how to establish for our own confidence that we were successful, and that would create a way to have either, criteria 9, both line and independent assessment of those things.
And I understand that there's never any internecine warfare with an NNSA. Everybody works together fabulously. So I'm assuming that there's...
My favorite person in all of NNSA.
I assume that there's no challenges because... So Pantex...
I have to return the favor.
Pantex is unique because it's not just the two of you that are involved in this. It's not just headquarters and Pantex. You've got the weapons labs involved because of, in this case, the hazard is the weapon being introduced into the facility. So I just want to make sure that as the implementation plan gets implemented, that you have buy-in from the weapons labs and the other part of the complex, the stockpile stewardship program. Do you feel like you have adequate support from them and in the execution of the implementation plan, and are there going to be any hiccups from that standpoint?
I'll start. There will always be some de minimis level of large organizations interacting where it's either just how to get on the same page, how to make sure everybody has the same information. One of the things that when I talked about, and Teresa also discussed this, ongoing effort where we haven't yet gotten to the point of saying in some key areas exactly what we're going to do, is because if we rush too quickly to one part of the large organization thinking it knows what to do, but not accounting for all the other parts, that might have been a root cause of why some of our previous efforts didn't ultimately produce sustainable results. So with Jason Armstrong, who's here in the audience's leadership, we are very intentionally and with fairly significant amount of resource and attention from senior folks, ensuring that every part of the organization that has a stake in this, because it is so complicated, is represented. And I've been in meetings where two parts of the organization that have presumably been working for years on the same thing, in that meeting came to an understanding that they saw the same thing differently. And so those kinds of insights have been very helpful. So that's item number one, that part of why we have this effort going on is to make sure that we account for all those interfaces. The other thing I'll point out is that we are very lucky to have, as the head of defense programs right now, Dr. Charlie Verdon, who spent years as the weapons response senior manager at Lawrence Livermore, who comes to his job with lots of personal experience in this very topic, and he is providing his personal senior leadership in topics and discussions, and both Teresa and I have spent quite a bit of time talking with him about his experiences and how he and his organization can help ensure that this is a collaborative effort.
Next slide, please. Here we have what we believe are some unaddressed sub-recommendations. IP did not contain actions to address all of the elements of these. I'll let you read them. I think we've covered that first one sufficiently, but see if I don't see any other questions. And the second one was maintenance and well qualifications. Any comments, questions?
No, I think you addressed that one. I do want to point out, though, in sub-recommendation D, we focused on following technicians, but in the document that you received, we spoke also of, dropped tooling, instrumentation, other impacts and gouges. So I just want to make sure that this is not just all about the falling man scenario. There are other scenarios. There are other hazard analysis that fell short, no pun intended, in other parts of the issue.
So the one thing I can share on impact scenarios, we did when we did the extent of condition reviews, we looked very thoroughly at all scenarios because we wanted to make sure we captured and identified any impact scenarios as well, impact hazards. So we believe we did look at that in the extent of condition reviews.
Next slide, please. Insufficient scope in IP actions fails to fully address actions the board specifically recommended. And there's some examples. I'll let you read them. And let's see if I have any questions.
I don't know that I have any questions, just to restate. I mean, we look forward to seeing what comes out of, however you call it, improved IP and the white paper. I still feel like we're talking past each other here, but I think we need to see where you end up.
Next slide, please. IP responsiveness to root causes. IP may not address the causes of the deficiencies identified in the recommendation. There are some examples.
I think we talked about it.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the special tooling, and one of the issues was unclear management guidance. How do you intend to capture the guidance that you're going to be giving with regard to the special tooling in terms of NQ qualification and maintenance and what have you? What form will that take?
So in looking at that, one of the considerations is what do we have in place today? And when I looked at that, we have a safety management program that's unique to Pantex in our safety bases, and it's called the Special Tooling Program. I reviewed that. It needs to be improved. So we're going to look at ensuring it captures all of those critical elements that we've talked about here today. In addition, the safety basis captures for each special tool the safety factors for each of the special tools. And we found that we can improve that. We need to ensure that there are functional requirements specified for all aspects of the safety factors, and that we also include performance criteria in accordance with the DOE requirements. And so we are going to be upgrading that. But I do believe that since we approved the safety management program as part of the safety basis document, that should be where we specify how we expect special tooling to be designed, procured, manufactured, tested, maintained, and all of those functions.
So I know that the special tooling program is unique to Pantex, and obviously you guys kind of cornered the market on special tools across the complex. But is there anything, Mr. McConnell, from your point of view, that rises to the level of this should be a complex-wide guidance document that we give on special tooling? I don't know where else in the complex you have, to the extent that you have it at Pantex, but you may have it to a lesser extent. But I just don't know if they're safety class or safety significant the way they are at Pantex.
That's an excellent idea, and we'll take that to consider. With 10 seconds to think about it, I would say that in many places where we have those kinds of interests, it's more about quality, and I'm talking about mission quality or product quality, than it is necessarily about the safety class, safety significant implications at Pantex. But we'll take that question for sure.
Next slide, please. Plans is IP deliverables. Proposed deliverables do not provide evidence of completed actions. And there's a couple of examples. Later.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we talked about
We've
this
got this covered, yeah.
extensively. I don't have any additional
Okay.
questions.
The next slide, please. This is our last slide. It takes the sub-recommendations and kind of gives us a stoplight chart of our view of what we think is good, not so good, and not so good. So, any comments from the board?
I'd just say it's our assessment based on largely our feedback to you after the implementation plan. So it kind of reflects where we think the significance of the gap existed. And when we see the next version of the implementation plan, this is what we'll compare it to.
Ma'am, if I could for just a second, for the record, I know you stated in your opening remarks that we have endeavored within the department to improve Pantex safety basis through a number of different efforts. My colleague, Mr. McConnell, hit on it briefly. Having Dr. Charlie Verdon as the Deputy Administrator for Defense Programs and Lisa Gordon Haggerty as the Undersecretary for Nuclear Security and the NNSA Administrator. They both are personally engaged in ensuring that we solve the Pantex safety basis improvement initiatives. In fact, this topic was discussed. The Administrator host an NNSA Council. We had that NNSA Council meet on Tuesday of this week. Pantex safety basis was a topic. The members of that council, besides the administrator, is each of the field office managers and each of the laboratory directors or the plant managers. And this was a topic that garnered a lot of attention. You ask if the weapons response, the design agencies and the national laboratories are engaged in this. They definitely are. Each of the laboratory directors talked about the need to ensure that we're all on the same team as we resolve and improve the Pantex safety basis. So I just wanted to share that with you. I believe that it is different this time. And you have senior level commitment all the way up to the administrator. I'm personally engaged in this activity. They're biweekly briefings. I know my staff and the CNS staff would probably not have me interrogate them every 2 weeks on the status of the actions that we have committed to. But I believe that's very important. I'll also point out CNS finds this very serious, and they have dedicated a resource and an action officer, Mr. Dave Kupfer. He was a former member of your staff and a former resident inspector, and he is dedicated to ensuring that he's tracking and maintaining status on these and ensuring things are getting done correctly. So I do believe that it's going to be different this time. We will be successful because it's imperative that we are.
I thank you for that, and I would say I'm appreciative to hear that. I find that very gratifying, and actually I think there are many benefits from other field office managers being a part of this because there are things that they could probably take home as well too. But I would say to you Ms. Robbins and Mr. McConnell. Since 2010, I have seen a series of boards, and there have been a series of administrators. And at the end of the day, the two of you are going to be the ones that get this done. And so I'm very glad you're here. I'm pleased that you have the support that you have. But in reality, you're the senior career folks that are the ones that are going to make sure this gets done at the end.
And I won't speak for Mr. McConnell, but I feel very confident when I say this that we are both dedicated to that, ma'am.
I couldn't agree more.
That's our last slide. Before we go to closing remarks, are there any other questions on the slide deck?
So I just want to ask the practical question. You had said that you were willing to revise the IP, and again, I understand the position that you took at the beginning that you know it's up to you guys to make the decisions, and then you get feedback from us. I'm hoping at this point you're willing to have the conversations with our resident inspectors and our staff who are familiar with at least what the board is thinking to help you understand where our concerns are in addition to this meeting. So I'm just kind of looking forward to the next steps. We don't have to decide it here, but I can leave that question open-ended, but it would be helpful for us to know that our staff is engaged because we are seized of this issue and will remain so. And I just don't want to kind of wait to something else to get lobbed over the transom that and not know what to expect other than, you know, what you've said here today. Thank you.
And I appreciate that. I said there was a robust amount of information backing up the recommendation to begin with. The letter you sent on comments was very useful, but it was necessarily fairly high level. So I think we would love to take you up on that offer to make sure that at a technical staff level we have the best understanding of where you currently sit in your perspective of what we're doing, so that we don't end up going in a direction that we think is responsive, but for whatever reason is not. Thank you.
Since we are in a public meeting, are there any other items that you want to deliberate on between the three of us?
You didn't give us a bathroom break, so no.
If you have that much deliberation, we can take one.
I don't.
Yeah. Okay, we're good. Anything you want to talk about? Okay, well, we'll go to closing remarks. I'd like to thank Jim McConnell and Teresa Robbins for taking the time to come discuss these important issues regarding our shared interests in ensuring public health and safety at the Pantex Plant. And I'm going to now turn to Ms. Roberson for her closing remarks.
As usual, I thank you both for your support of our relationship, your responsiveness today, and as we were just at Y12 out in the field. I appreciate it. I thank you for looking open-mindedly and seriously at what was in the recommendation and what our communications have been back and forth. We appreciate that. And I have a lot of confidence that you have every commitment that's going to enhance the mission at Pantex through the activities you take in regard to safety in the future. So thank you for being here.
So I'd like to echo those comments. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being willing to engage with us on these topics. I do feel better having heard kind of what's going on behind the scenes. I feel a little chagrined that the way we find these details out is through a public meeting. I wish there were better communication so we would have those details kind of up front. I am very encouraged by what you said, Ms. Robbins, about NNSA taking this seriously at the federal level and having these conversations. I understand the kind of management push for the contractor partner scenario, but contractors come and go, and the backbone of the protection of the public health and safety resides with the federal workforce. And so to me, it's your involvement, your personal involvement, your personal commitment. And it's gratifying to see you have command of the details of your site. We don't always see that with site managers that come to talk to us about safety bases. Some don't actually know what's in their safety bases. So I think that's again, very gratifying to me, and I think it's encouraging to know that that you are working on these issues and take them seriously and are digging into the details of special tooling and walking the plant. I think that is to your credit. So I appreciate you both coming today, and we look forward to the next iteration of the IP.
Thank you, Ms. Connery. I think everyone here knows I didn't support the recommendation. That doesn't mean that I think there's zero risk at the Pantex plant. The adequate protection standard was established by Congress without defining it to some objective detail, and they instead provided a board with different views and different backgrounds in order to come up with a balanced conclusion. But at the end of the day, adequate protection is defined as a subjective evaluation. The difference that I have between the difference that the board has that I have between this with my other board members is not a yes or no question. It's a matter of where we each draw a very subjective line between adequate and inadequate. I happen to draw it in a different place, and so I did not support the recommendation. I haven't heard anything that would make me want to change that view. I put my reasoning for that in my detailed remarks that are associated with the notational vote that we posted on February 19th, and so I don't need to repeat them here. But I did have one thought that I did want to add. I'm a little bit troubled, and this is Jim McConnell. You remember from last time we were here, I made the same comment. I want to make it again because it's kind of connecting the dots on multiple places, and I'm a little bit troubled that we are using a plan to check off complete. And I used this phrase last time, and I'll say it again because I got some good mileage out of it. It's kind of like saying that, saying an action is complete based on establishing a plan is kind of like saying that I don't have credit card debt because I've got a plan to pay off my credit card debt. It's either a problem or it's been fixed. A plan to fix it isn't the answer. It may get you to the answer, but it's not there yet. For example, this implementation plan, item 1.7, addressed legacy conditions that are going to require improvement upgrades, and that was closed based on a plan that's going to go through fiscal year 2024, and who knows what kind of funding challenges we're going to have between now and 2024. So I wanted to say this to the end because it really is a cross-cutting issue from our last public meeting where we discussed this same thing. And I just offer that for your consideration because it's something that kind of disturbs me. That said, I remain convinced that I personally remain convinced that the safety nexus at the Pantex plant as it exists today adequately protects the public health and safety. Again, thank you, Mr. McConnell and Ms. Robbins, for being here. I know you don't just roll out of bed one morning and come and give briefings like this, so I know it took a lot of work and time to do it, so I very much appreciate it. That concludes my personal remarks, and this concludes the public meeting of the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board. We are adjourned.